Billy Cobham. How you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Thank you so much.
How about yourself?
I'm fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Where are you, Scotty?
I am in Brooklyn, New York. I was actually going to ask the same question to you. I know you're somewhere in Europe, correct?
I'm in Bern, Switzerland, but I know Brooklyn. What part? Where are you from?
Bed-Stuy off the C train.
Get out of here. I lived on Chauncey Street between Lewis and Stuyvesant.
Oh, really? I'm right off of, the McDonald's on Fulton next to Troop Avenue?
Oh, that McDonald's didn't exist when I lived there.
Okay.
They didn't even no, that was McDonald's was actually, I think, originally owned by Gene Autry.
Really?
Yeah, way before your time, man.
Yeah,
I would say 1947. I lived in Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy, right across the street from the Robert Fulton Park.
That's amazing. Yeah, I've only been here. Well, I've been in the city about, 6-7 years. So I still have like 3 more years till I'm technically a New Yorker. But I've been in Bed-Stuy for, I think, 4, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I met my roommate in music school, and he had an apartment here already, and I was getting knocked out of my dorm because you can't stay, more than a semester, and so it just worked out. Yeah. I've been here ever since, and I've been doing this show. The whole time I've been doing this show has been from here.
Mm-hmm. What music school?
I went to the New School, in the West Village in Manhattan.
Yeah, I know that. Jimmy Owens and a whole bunch of those guys go there.
Yes.
Horace, yeah.
Yeah, I taught.
Chico to teach there. All kinds of people I know from there. Yeah, sure.
I used to take from, Amir Zeev. Did you ever meet Amir Zeev?
I know the name, but I don't believe I know the gentleman. No.
He was my main instructor while I was there, and he was the absolute best. I have amazing memories from the New School. I'm really happy I went.
Wonderful.
But I was going to ask, how long have you been living in Europe? Because I know you moved recently. Were you moving from outside to Europe, or are you just moving around?
2023. So I've been here in Europe for 43 years.
I did not know that. That's amazing.
It was a secret. You see, I didn't want anybody to. No, I mean, when you come to Europe, generally speaking, and you leave the United States, if no one sees you for maybe bordering somewhere between 3 and 6 months, then they expect that you're dead. So that's just the United States, especially on the coast. It's like, what? You're still alive? I've received bouquets of flowers from people. I got it from Atlantic Records, my record label at the time, because they hadn't heard from me, and so they heard through the grapevine somehow that I had passed away, and I received a bouquet of flowers from them here in Zurich, and then a friend of mine, fellow drummer, called, and he was crying on the phone. He was in England doing a master class or something, and he heard that I died from another American who was living it. And I just went, this is normal. I mean, there's so much going on in the United States that, attention span back then, it was already short at about 20 minutes, Now, give it about 8 seconds. It's way out of line.
I thought you were joking. I didn't think people actually seriously thought you were dead. That's crazy. Will you say who the drummer was, or no? You don't want to embarrass him.
I prefer not to. It'd be better.
That's okay. Don't worry. I'm not going to push you.
Just because it's a joke, but it's not. It's not something we should really linger on. Not for that.
Of course, no. I don't want to embarrass anybody. But you're from Panama originally, right? You lived there for the first couple of years.
Yes, I am. I am from Panama. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember? Because I know you ended up moving to New York only when you were around 3, I think. So do you?
I was 3 years old back then. So I don't remember a whole lot, except my grandfather gave me. I wanted a dime, and he said he only had 2 nickels, so he gave me. No, I wanted 10 cents. But I wanted 2 nickels, and he gave me a dime, and that's all I remember. Things like that, little tiny things that actually stay in my memory, and I just go, okay, all right.
What was your house life like? Like, who was in the house when you were really young? I know obviously you don't remember much because you're only 3 in Panama, but once you moved to New York, stuff like that.
I only know that there was a lot of banging going on. It turned out that I had cousins who were making steel drums. Pan, and as they call it down there, and also they were making cugas, and so it was kind of difficult for me not to end up playing percussion.
What did your family do, like in terms of their work?
They were working people, generally speaking. They covered a lot of bases. But in Panama, I guess probably the same in any other country in the world. There are people who the mankind. I found it's so ingenious. We have this computer up here, and if you need to survive, oh boy, all you have to do is think a little bit. I got to eat. I got to find a way to sell something, or I got to live, and I can't live out in the open because there's a thunderstorm coming. What am I going to put over my head, and how? Build a house. All these different things start to come together, and you find that generally speaking, you don't need a degree for that. I mean, it's just that you're just trying to survive.
Yeah.
And you're just trying to stay on the right path to work with the tools that you have more efficiently. And it could be anything. And in Panama, that's pretty much the name of the game. It's a small country. I don't think more than 4 million people. And if you count the indigenous tribes that go and come at the drop of a hat, and you wouldn't even know they left until you wake up the following morning and there's nothing in the fields or everybody's long gone. Mm-hmm. Where'd they go? They call it the canopy. It's a jungle that runs from all the way down Brazil, all middle to northern Brazil, all the way through to Guatemala. And there are lots of roads inside there that one would never see from the air. Of course, you have all of this technology now, so they can pretty much map out if who's there, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But these people still find a way to come and go, sell their wares because they have to survive somehow. And a lot of the things that they find, and just as I get for thousands of years, and nothing's generally changed much with them. So there's no census on them, really. You can't tell when they were around.
So what ended up pushing your family to move from Panama to Brooklyn?
Opportunity.
What was the opportunity?
We had people in the family who did some very interesting things, like look at blueprints without having to go to school for anything. It all seemed to make less sense for them, so they could look at an architectural blueprint, follow it, do the electrical implantation in a building, just because it all made sense. Go figure. Or you find my father was a statistician. He had this gift that he could actually remember all the numbers. I mean, if this can be a throwback to Prohibition in the 1920s, 30s, people had to survive and they played the numbers, so that it was always this game that supposedly was against the law, but along with liquor. But so people would call a number, and that number might fall at one point or another, and there was a certain central bank, for lack of a better term, run by characters who were not inside the government system. So they called them the mafia. That's a good name, and or whatever. And those guys ran a very legitimate game because it had to be legitimate to have a good reputation.
Mm-hmm.
We're the people who only worked for 5 or 10 cents an hour, if that. But they saved their money somehow, and with the idea that if they were lucky and they played the right number with these people, lo and behold, they would get what they felt was very rich, very fast.
Yeah.
But of course, it was a gamble. So people kept giving numbers on a piece of paper of what they thought that number was going to be for that day. That's now called the lottery. You see?
There you go.
But it came from there. And whatever they made, I mean, a $5 bill went a long way back then, guy. And there was a phone, maybe a phone call would be 2 cents. Things like this. Nothing to do with what's happening now. And next thing you know, my father was the kind of guy that could remember numbers, could do additions, could make additions in his mind, in his head, of basic things that we think of. Well, gosh, I need to take out my iPhone now and just calculate, how much was this or when was this and what is the percentage and blah 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 blah.
He could do that all
And my
himself.
and he just let's say a simple situation like we have to go to the grocery store and we have to buy supplies for the week. Okay, he got paid. He goes with my mom. He's adding up every item as he's going along of what it is that we're buying or they're buying. If I even tag along, because that for me that'd be boring. So that said, we got to check everything out. He already knew what it was going to be and could tell the cashier how much they were going. I mean, he came up with exactly the right amount of money. And the cashier said, "But I don't need your money now. I have to add all of this up." He says, "I don't have time for that. Here's the money. It costs so and so and so and so." And she says, "Okay, then I have to prove it." He says, "I don't have time to wait for you to prove it." Now his impatience would then get in the way. But it was a very interesting thing because he said, "This is it. Why should I have to wait?" And in the environment where we are, of course he had to wait. And they checked it out. And they went, "That's amazing that you would have all of this." And then, of course, he was working for as a statistician. He worked for Bronx General Hospital in the Bronx, and got his gold watch 40 years later doing that. Big problem. He was necessary because he never wrote anything down, and everything that he collected for the hospital in terms of supplies, bed linen, any drugs that were, all of that had to come through his organization downstairs, and where they would take it all in, and he'd watch and he'd check it all out, and then leave a message. Yes, it's all come. It's correct. All the numbers are right. Blah 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 blah. And he just knew how to make it all happen. And so, of course, they went, "Well, it's not broken. Don't fix it." The guy knows what he's doing, not knowing that he never wrote anything down. And when it was time for them to go, "Well, you are now past your period of retirement. It's time for you to retire." He said, "Okay." And they said, "Well, we need to find somebody else, but we can't seem to find. We need all of the records that you kept." And he says, "Oh, you mean written? No, I never kept any records." Big problem. This is the biggest hospital in the Bronx, and he didn't keep any records.
He could do it all in his mind. That's crazy. I could
Yeah,
never even get close.
Yeah, some people are like that. I had an uncle who worked on buildings in. They would fly him to Argentina, fly him to Chile. His big deal, he was an electrical engineer, but he never went to school for it. He just picked up a book and started reading it, and it all seemed to make a lot of sense. You connect, the finger bone to the elbow, and all of that kind of stuff, and you go, "Okay, seems to make sense to me." And then he'd go and just do it and fix it. And the problem on the short side was that where my family didn't understand the value of what they had, they just were not competitive in the market. They were below even where they would be. And this is, again, there's a racial issue in all of this, of course, but there was even more for my family. These guys were so, I think, inspired by themselves. I mean, they were into themselves so much that they forgot that what they knew was of such value. They never thought to build on it. They just didn't have the mindset, so they could get away with all of this stuff, and it made them the big guy on the block. Okay, But it really, if they had the mind to make what they were born with better, maybe I wouldn't be talking to you. I don't know. It's just that That's the way it was. A lot of in my family, a lot of the men did the same thing. I mean, they were born with these gifts of mathematics, science, music. My father was a piano player. We never had a pianist in the house. We never had a piano in the house. He studied piano by listening to his brother, who had to study and play. His brother was the eldest brother, and in my family, the eldest son was given to the church to play the organ in the church and be the organ minister. My uncle Edwin did that, but my father would stand by the door when their father wasn't, my grandfather wasn't watching, to see what he was doing, and he wouldn't remember it. So say you go into he's the kind of guy that would be good for playing bars and just like a piano player in a corner. And he's earning extra money to do this on tips. He'd make more money on tips than he'd make working a week, at least double.
Wow.
And because people kept putting money, and he never had a piano in the house. What he did have was a wonderful radio that he could hear the arrangements of some of the most incredible artists of that time, and he would memorize it. And then he would just go and sit down at the piano and play it, always in a very interesting key. For a lot of people I know who don't read music, who just play because they saw that they could play, they normally play in F sharp. Not in F, but in F sharp or in B.
Yeah.
You know, it's just that kind of thing. They hear it like a semitone up or down from where everybody else would normally play. Mm-hmm. But and any tune you want, you name a tune. If he didn't know the name, he'd say, "Okay, if you just whistle a little bit or sing a little bit of the tune, no matter how drunk you are, he's going to make it sound good."
That's interesting, though, because people usually, I mean, in my experience with that very technical, mathematician type mind, sometimes they have trouble picking up on things by ear because although they're good at analyzing things, they want to learn it on a technical level rather than a feeling, a creative, a musical level. So it's interesting that he was able to do both, be so smart with numbers and things like that, which is something I'm not at all, and then also be able to just hear something and pick it up musically like that. That's amazing.
Yeah, he'd go to a dance or something. He knew a lot of the musicians that were famous in the time. So Dizzy Gillespie, Moody, people, they knew exactly who he was, and they'd be talking just about music, and he was just a fan. But he loved to be around great musicians, and he would just go ahead and he'd listen, and then they'd say, "Yeah, come on, play a little bit," and he'd get up there and play. Now his problem, his Achilles heel, was that he played alone all the time. So he only had his own sense of timing. So he got faster or, he got slower because he's only listening to himself. So this is what I mean. I mean, there are different levels of performance levels. And when you get something like that, if you realize what you have and you can, no matter how amazing you may be, there's always room to grow.
So then what was the music that you said he was picking up on all this music? And when you were young, what were you hearing in the house? Was it usually like Panamanian music, like, cumbia, saloma, stuff like that, salsa?
Well, not only Latin music, of course, Latin, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean music, of course. But we still listen to the classical symphonies, and we listen a lot to the jazz. I mean, this is in the days when Count Basie was in the top 10 on the Billboard charts. Sinatra, Tony Bennett, Mel Torme, and it went on and on and on. And all of the tunes that were written had some very, very seriously deep stories, lyrics, the musicianship level. These guys were well-accomplished players, well-accomplished. Not just in school, But when they played their instrument, they told you a story through the instrument. It wasn't about just playing the notes because the note fit into the chord. It was why those notes. And the alternative to that, which was at least as important, was when to play those notes, the timing, when to leave air so that people, so that one could digest the idea as we speak. You're playing an instrument, whether it be a trumpet, a guitar, or anything else, you got to know. And I mean, the biggest example for that kind of stuff is the blues. When you play a blues, generally speaking, it's not going to be a whole lot of notes because there's just only but so many notes that'll tell that story. And at some point in time, there's got to be air between the notes to allow the idea to take root. It can't just be, a lot of yakking. I mean, people like it. Sometimes I listen to get not only guitar players, but a lot of people who are too well, to me, have so much information and knowledge. And so it sounds like a couple of tractor trailer trucks going breaker, 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 and the guys are talking, and it's all correct. It's all correct. I mean, and it's inside the change. But no one's listening to each other. And that's a big problem. Back in those days, it was a lot of, the artistry was at a level that was very unique. I'm not saying it's better than now. It was what they had to work with. And if you can understand, there was no way that a musician today could go back and fix a part because there was no multi-track.
Yeah.
So therefore, you had to play in the recording session all the tunes on side A, turn over the thing, and play all the tunes on side B. If you were going to have a and that's a pretty heavy situation. So that means a lot of rehearsals, a lot of gigs being played, everybody getting to know and feel comfortable with the music. That's where the art was coming.
So how did you end up becoming, I know you said like your cousins were making congas and percussion instruments, but having your father and your uncle being pianists, how did you end up becoming a drummer? And then how old were you when you really started like, shedding, taking it really seriously and having that become like your main thing?
I decided I wanted to be a musician when I was around between 6 and 8 years old. Seriously. And it was in my mind, nobody else could take that away from me. To accomplish that, because I wasn't that much of a talker generally, I was more of an observer. Just wanted to see how things were done. So I ended up going to Music and Art High School in Harlem, the school, which is now called the School of Performing Arts in New York. But it used to be in Harlem and it used to be in Manhattan. Now it's back behind the Philharmonic Hall and Juilliard. And the year that the school closed, no, I shouldn't say that. I graduated in 1962 from Music and Art in Harlem. And I knew that as to be the year that officially the school was going to make the move to Midtown Manhattan. But as it turned out, it maybe took another 10 years before that happened, minimum. That was a school that you could find a lot of young people that went to this school but at the time I was going there, it was Jimmy Owens, trumpet, Eddie Gomez was in school there. Larry Willis was there at school with me.
One thing I always regret about when I went to school is that I never got a class with Jimmy Owens at the new school, and I wanted to, but there was never a time where his class, like I needed the credits for it and I didn't need the credits for something else. And I regret that because like I always wanted to be in a Jimmy Owens class because everyone has like the best Jimmy Owens like class stories, and I don't have that. I'm so sad about it.
Yeah. He's a real sweetheart. He's very special. And also, who else was in my class? I don't know if you ever became aware of a guy named Richard T. You ever hear that? Piano
I'm not
player.
sure.
He's a
Then
keyboard
probably
player
not.
that he used to play with he was in Paul Simon's band. He
Okay.
played piano. Okay. Well, he was also in my high school class, and he
Jeez.
was very special. He played with King Curtis. He supported Aretha Franklin. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The special thing about that school also is that we had the opportunity to participate in the New York Youth Orchestra, and that was run at the time by Maestro Bernstein. So it was that level of instruction with teachers that we would. I remember my teachers, especially one, the guy that got me into school in 1959, 58 or 59. His name was Gabriel Kosakov. Why was he so important? Well, he went to music and art himself, and then was in the army and in the army band. He was a trombone player, and he came out as a teacher. Okay, good. He got me in there, and I'll never forget the day. I mean, he asked me what to do. My test was very basic. He says, "Play this pattern, blah 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 blah." And I played it. Okay, sing these notes, and I sing the notes. And he says, "You might make it. The big problem is not the music. The problem is going to be keeping your grades up. You've got to have at least a C average to stay in the school at that time." And he said, "I see you being more focused on the music than anything else. You just really, and you have to find a way to balance out." Okay, that's 1957 or 58. I couldn't go before then. Okay. Fast forward to 2017, 2016.
Uh-huh.
I'm performing at Sony Hall in New York City.
Times Square, right?
It had just opened up because BB King's has been shut down
Yeah.
at that point. And I finished with my band. It's a Crosswinds project. And so I turn around and I see, he was a big man, even when I was a little kid, but yeah, that even more now, because he's standing in front of me like the Tower of London. He was a very tall man. And I'm looking at him. Now, you have to understand, that's 1958 to 2017. Okay. Mr. Gabriel Kosakov died 2 years ago.
Wow.
He was in his 90s. When I saw him, I looked at him and I went, and the funniest thing about the story is that I looked the man in the face, and all of a sudden I knew exactly who he was, and I became little Billy Cobham, like a kid. And I went, I'm okay. I'm saying to everybody, "Okay, man, I'll sign this autograph." Blah, blah, blah. And he just puts his hands in front of me, and I look at him and I go, "Mr. Kosakov, how are you? What are you doing here?" Now, that's what I'm hearing myself say in my head. I just psychologically shrunk to the little kid in high school.
That's crazy.
And he looks at me and goes, "I'm not dead yet." I freaked. I went, "What? How?" He said, "You remember my daughter? When I met his daughter, she was going to go to Cornell to become a lawyer. She had since then retired it was like, it's like all this time in your life just gets compressed. Bang. And all these little things start coming out, and I was like amazed at it. That all of all the things that happened, because one of the first band that I was with also some of the guys in my band went to music and art as well. Artie Simmons, who was Roy Haynes' nephew, we used to rehearse at his house. George Cables, who lived in he's a piano player, and he went out with Art Blakey after school. Eddie Gomez, the bass player that I mentioned before, he left high school to go on tour with Bill Evans, the pianist. I mean, immediately from high school. I mean, it was this kind of thing, and he's been on the road ever since. You know, it's just crazy.
What was that band like? Were you playing like bop? What was the genre you guys were playing?
Eddie bass, you know, and you look him up, Eddie Gomez. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I wasn't there for the concert because you have to in some environments it's required at school. You have to play your final exam, and he played an excerpt from Bach's Cantata and Fugue on bass, and so he was a great bass violinist in high school. He played at those days. It was a big band made up of what they considered to be the most talented that they could find young people to play in a big band. It was about 15 to 17 pieces, and you'd find all kinds of musicians in it from all over the city playing in that big band. And Eddie was a bass player. Jimmy Owens was playing third chair. There's a lot of cats. I think maybe even Larry Wilson was playing piano. I don't know. You ever heard of the band Blood, Sweat, and Tears?
Oh, of course, yeah.
A lot of those guys were in the school with me.
Wow.
They were also there. A lot of those guys went to school with me there, and then ended up going up to Berkeley to teach. You know, at the original guys. You know, and it's just been. Those are the kind of memories you remember, and then it wasn't an odd thing, bizarrely enough, to see a jazz musician like Thelonious Monk or Miles Davis just walk into the school auditorium, and it was like, now you're talking about the Pied Piper and all of the lemmings and which are the kids just walking behind them and going in to sit down. And there was one occasion where Monk actually got up on the stage. I don't know if he was out of his mind or not. He just started playing piano on the piano, and the auditorium, the school auditorium, was jammed.
Wow.
After school, this is after school. We used to hang out. The beauty of the school was that you came. You almost never wanted to leave school. And some of us had to go home, like myself. I was either on the cross-country team or a track team, or I was looking to play baseball or something, or running, mostly track. So if it's cross-country in the morning, I had to be there. If school started at 9, I had to be there running by 8 o'clock around City College campus, because that's where school is, and preparing for Van Cortlandt Park. There was a season in the fall, and then that kind of set us up for the indoor track season that came right after that. So it was that kind of situation. So I would leave home from South Ozone Park near an airport that at the time was called Idlewild Airport, not John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
Because he hadn't died yet. And so I'd have to leave there, catch a bus, take the bus to Hillside Avenue and Sutton Boulevard, catch the E train, go all the way in to 53rd, if I'm remembering this right, 53rd Street and 7th Avenue, switch, go downstairs, catch either the D train, and then take the D train, something like this, to 125th Street, change again, catch the B train, and go one stop to 137th Street, and then walk about 500 meters upstairs to school on the hill.
So you were very, very devoted into learning your craft at that point. That was like, I'll do anything.
Yeah, and that's the only. I mean, to me, I saw this stuff on a little bit of television. We see, it was. What am I getting at? The fact that we could study. It was music and art. So I was in the homeroom class that was run by a teacher whose name I don't remember right now at all, who controlled the homeroom, and he was an art teacher. Okay, art history, things like this. And there were other teachers that were part of this arts for the musicians, because the sonic and the visual is very, very important, very important. And no one missed these classes. No one missed these classes. Not because you were going to get in trouble. It was obvious that it was necessary to understand how to develop. Well, what was I dealing with? What happened in the history, the Renaissance, all those periods that just meant there were words, but what it ended up for me was that I got interested in history, European history, because I understood that a lot of the stuff that I was being affected by started over there. Hence, maybe that's why I'm here, because I'm still studying. The things that I see that I go, get out of here. Not to mention, I mean, just going into places like Romania, middle Europe, not Western Europe, but Middle Europe, the Bulgarians, there were some other countries that are no longer countries now. After the Yalta Conference, they changed the borders, and some of those countries are gone. But the music, Hungary, of course, the musicians there are unbelievable. These are people who, because they hear something, they play it. And then you go to an education, an institution, and they say that is not possible. You don't play that on this instrument.
Yeah.
And that guy goes, "Oh, you mean like this?" And that causes that's an interesting situation to see. And most people can't do it because they hadn't heard it. And again, it brings up that question of which comes first, the chicken or the egg? If you can hear it, you can play.
So you're devoting,
but you have to do it in a context that you feel comfortable with.
I guess. You.
You take a great guitarist like Alan Holdsworth when he was around. His hands he could have played basketball. I mean, it was huge, but he's playing. The fingerboard was like stupid small. But where the chords that he would put together in the music that he wrote or that he presented in his band, most guitarists couldn't play that. The fingering was just ridiculous, And he's also covering two strings at once or things like this or chords, and it's just moving all over the place because his hands are so big and thin and long. That's another gift.
Yeah. So you're in school.
You get to know it,
I was gonna say, so you're in school and you're devoting more than just your physical time into this. You're learning about the history of all this stuff. You graduate pretty soon after you end up getting drafted, which I can imagine after you graduate, you're like, I want to be a musician. That must have absolutely smacked you right off the planet Earth, because that must have felt like at the time, obviously in retrospect, you have this amazing career, but at the time that must have felt like that was a major setback, right?
No, I took it as an opportunity for me. Again, I wasn't going to leave. I mean, I'm not going to get out of the draft. No way. Big thing for me to think about this. What would I do in the Army? I'm not good at shooting weapons. I mean, I didn't even know which way to hold a gun, So I just turned around and said, wait a minute. Well, they got bands. And I was, at the time, when I wasn't going to school, I was involved in what they call marching and maneuvering corps, M&M corps, all over the place. And so, of course, I was part of one. And like Steve Gadd was as well.
Yeah.
And, a bunch of us. And that kept me off the streets because it also kept my chops up. And I needed at that time to to really address the discipline question about how to play, how to sit, posture at the drum set, how to walk when carrying a marching drum, to get to work on my energy level, and all these kind of things started to fall into place for me working with colleagues in marching bands. Now the other thing about it that I went and I auditioned first for the Air Force Band, and they said, "Yeah, but you'll have to stay with us for 4 years." And I said, "No, I don't want to stay there." But where they wanted me also to go, I was I was really seriously considering going. I went to the Air Force because I knew some friends who worked in marching and maneuvering corps, and they knew my history in M&M. So it was perfect for me to go to the United States Air Force Airmen of Note and the Drum Corps.
Yeah.
And then within all of that, I did play, again, the classical side. I was much better marimba player than I am and xylophone player than ever I am now. All these things I felt, hey, this has value. I could do it, but when they said 4, and then what I wanted to do with the Airmen of Note, they were looking for, no, that'd be more like 8. I'm going, no, man, no, not for me. As much as no. So I went to the United States Army Band and immediately was accepted at Perishing Zone. But the problem is they didn't really have any space for me. So then it was the Army Field Band. And again, they're saying, if you were to sign here and commit to another 4 years, no, come on, man. And they said, well, you're not going to work out. You'll never work. Once you get out of this, if you only stay for 3, you're not going to have anything on the street. You should just, I'll take my chances. And lo and behold, I got out in 1968, went in 64, I think. So at the beginning of 68, and I was on the street for 2 weeks. The next thing you know, I was with Horace Silver for 10 months.
Yeah, I wanted to ask because I saw that overlap was, I didn't know it was only 2 weeks, but I saw online that it was very, very, very small. How did that happen? How'd you get connected with him?
A lot of things happened for me while I was in the service. And that was one of the big pluses of being a musician in the service. There were, and I was also stationed home at home. So I lived at home, literally, while I was in the Army Band. I was in the 378th Army Band. Finally, I got comfortable with that for at least a year or so, 1.5 years, 2 years. And there, I was able to moonlight my buns off. I mean, I was always playing with somebody while I was still in the Army Band because we only had so much that we needed to do, of course, and we could cover all of that and still have time for ourselves and get paid for it. I used to get $20 a day to go home and sleep.
That's nice.
Twist my arm, baby. And that went a long way back then. Because when the basic fee for a specialist 2, a specialist 4, I think it was $122, $125 a month. And I went, yeah, this is rough, Of course I did. I mean, I had to do that. And so I got to know a lot of musicians. Grady Tate was a real strong mentor of mine. Dr. Billy Taylor, great mentor. Chris White, Rudy Collins, all these guys would have so much to do and of course Mel Lewis, Thad Jones. They needed substitutes, but they needed people that they could trust. And that the scene in New York City back then was like, requirement is if you say you can do something and you're recommended by an incumbent, don't mess up. Mm-hmm. It's not just you. The incumbent also loses. So you got to know that when they when they are saying, "Hey man, you sound good," not just you sound good is a fluff off. That means, yeah, so, yeah, man, you sound great, man. Blah 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 blah. Okay, talk,
Killing,
talk,
man,
talk.
killing.
But when the phone rings and it's a person that you are familiar with, and they say, "Billy, are you free tomorrow?" That's what you want to hear.
Yeah.
Are you able to do this one thing? I got a jingle. I need somebody to sub. Can you make it? And if you say yes, okay, man, be there, and they'll give you the date, the time, the studio, and if you go and you set, I mean, it's a test. If you go, if it says it's going to start at 10 o'clock on a dingle, you don't go there to start at 10 o'clock in the jingle as a drummer. You don't walk in at 10. It starts at 10. So that means you have to walk in at 9, especially if you don't know what you're walking into.
Yes, sir.
All you need to do, and they're going to tell you, right? I mean, the last thing they're going to tell you before they start is what you're going to get into. What you do have to do as a drummer is set up your gear so that you're prepared for whatever is going to come, and be relaxed about it so that you understand. And if you can read it and you know what's coming, you might just keep the connection that you get, with a contractor who can then start to just drive you crazy on the other end, because that's the other side of it. You start to do these jingles and they like you. Oh, now you become their indentured servant. Now you're going to work. I mean, these jingles, they pay down the road very well, depending on what jingle it is.
Like with the residuals?
Initially, you might get $15 for the half an hour that you got.
Oof.
But, and to insult to injury, $15, sometimes I think I got $13 and for initial payment on a jingle check. It took me 13 weeks to get that check. 13 weeks for the check to be at the Musicians Union at that time.
Around what year was this when you first started writing these
1969.
So this is all. So the end of the 60s, you were basically doing 45 things at once, because you're with Horace and then left to do Dreams, and then you're doing the jingles.
I was working 60s. I mean, I made most of my recordings were with at Rudy Van Gelder's, with Creteller, with Kenny Burrell, Stanley Turrentine, all these people passing through, because those are the days, the end of the periods, when studio musicians had to come in and play on anything and be, in essence, a musical jack of all trades. I could end up subbing for Chauncey Morehouse in the New York Philharmonic on a night when he got sick or something, and I had to play bass. I had to look like a penguin, whatever. It was a gig. But you had to understand that what goes on, if they're calling you for this, you have to play the music and follow the conductor and do all of the things that are required to play this gig. It's nowhere near a joke. I mean, and that's what studio musicians did, from classics to Barnum and Bailey's Ringling Brothers, circus to Friday Night Fights live with the band, and you're playing, because they didn't have anything. So there was a studio and they played all of that stuff, and then they dropped it in at the beginning of the fight.
So at Van Gelder's, is that where you ended up getting hooked up with Miles?
Van Gelder's was a recording studio in New Jersey, and that was a jazz studio. It had nothing to do with what we did in New York. It's just that I got me, at the time that I was playing at Rudy's, fundamentally was either me, Steve wasn't on the scene yet, Gad.
Yeah.
Or me, Ayrton Morera, Jack DeChanette, maybe. And I did a lot of things there either for Prestige, Riverside, Blue Note, with the other accounts. Those are generally those kind of. Then Creed started his label, CTI, and then there was a sub-label called Kudu. I even did some producing for Salvation, which was another sub-label. and
Yeah.
I produced Ayrton on that.
And then Randy Brecker's first record was recorded at Van Gelder's, I believe, if I remember correctly. It's
I
been a
don't
couple
know.
months since I talked to him.
It was a great place to record. I mean, it still is. The studio's still open. It's still people are still recording there, to my knowledge.
Yeah. So then how'd you end up
Yeah,
meeting Miles Davis and getting with his band you were with him for what, like 1 or 2 years?
that was Jack DeJohnette. He came up, and we were playing at the Village Gate, 1969, and Jack was working with Miles in the big room downstairs. And I think in that band was Chick, Jack, Wayne, Dave Hollander, maybe, and Miles. And
Holy shit. That's a lineup.
yeah, they were working there for like 2 weeks or something. And I was working upstairs either with Phil Woods or Mingus or Junior Mance. I don't know,
Oh my
something like
God.
this. Anyway, and so it was like that was called the Top of the Gate. And I remember that week, I'm pretty sure, there was so much crazy things going on. One of them was that Neil Armstrong had just stepped on the moon, and we were playing in the background when those guys were stepping off onto the moon in the spaceship. And people said, this is a bad joke. This is not going to work. People were going to know that you can't see any stars behind there was no moon. Yeah, right. No one could understand why they couldn't see any stars.
Yeah.
You know, and so all of this was happening. And Jack came up and said to me, "Hey man, I wondered, would you be interested in working with Miles?" And I'm looking at him like, "What are you, stupid?" I mean, then I said, "This is a bad joke, right?" I said, "Bad joke, right?" Then no, I'm leaving, and I told him, and he said, if I knew of anybody and that might take in my place?" And I said, "Uh-huh." And he said, "Yeah, if you say it's okay, I'll tell him." I said, "Okay." Sure enough, he called me the following day and picked up the phone. No, my girlfriend at the time got upset because she couldn't understand what he was saying because he didn't speak very well. He had whispered a lot, Miles. So when I came in, I went on an errand. I came back, and she said, "Yeah, he had a call, but I couldn't understand the guy at all." So I said, "Okay. Well, what does he sound like?" He's whispering all the time. I said, "Did he leave a number?" She said, "Oh, yeah, it's right there." I said, "Give it to me."
Yeah. You knew immediately who that was.
Yeah, I knew where that was going. So I said, "Yeah, it's Billy calling." She says, "My house, 9 o'clock." I hung up on me. As if I'm supposed to know where he lives, but I did.
If you didn't know where he lived, your whole life that's like the butterfly effect of the century.
But let me tell you a story that ties into that. There was I forget who it was. I think it was Billy Taylor. He had a radio show, LIB, was the radio station, jazz station in Manhattan. And he had Miles on the show. I said, they're promoting at the Village Vanguard that Miles was playing Village Vanguard. And so he said to Miles during the interview, he says, "Oh, so like, who's in the band?" Miles says, he names everybody. He says, "Joe Anderson's playing saxophone." So that all came out, right? Later that day, in the following day that they're going to start, because it's before the thing, somebody sees Joe, who lived in Akron, Ohio. He had just come into town. He was making a record with somebody. And they said, "Hey, man, I'm going to shake you out when I see you tonight." And he says, "What?" And he said, "Yeah." They said, "Yeah, you're playing with Miles." He said, "What?" And they said, "Yeah. Where'd you hear that?" I said, "Well, it's just on Billy Taylor." He said, "Where's he playing?" He didn't know. And they said, "In Vanguard." He said, "Okay." He goes down to the Vanguard. Of course, he's late. That was Joe. And he walks in, and the band's playing. It's the quartet. After the tune ends, Miles goes on the microphone and says to Joe, "You're late."
That's brutal. That must have been like the most embarrassing thing.
It's just one of the classic stories. I mean, some of the things that happen in the jazz environment, it's to be taken with a chuckle.
Yeah.
It's a lot to learn from. It's so much to learn about different situations, and that's kept me going all this time.
Now, did you know John McLaughlin before you ended up working with Miles, or did you meet him through that directly?
Did I know him? I met him at Ronnie Scott's in New York. No, sorry, Ronnie Scott's in London when I was playing with Horace Silver. It was our last gig, and a lot of musicians were in town in London at that time. There was a big George Wein music festival tour that we were just finishing closing out. We had about literally festivals, all festivals, I'm pretty sure. Uh, 45 performances between October and the beginning of December. I mean, because I left home easily early October, and I didn't see my apartment again until December. And McLaughlin I met there, and he was working with a drummer named Tony Oxley, who ended up playing with Bill Evans as well out of England. And then after that, I met him at Count Basie's, which was uptown also, up around Lexington Avenue or something like that. And Miles was working up there in the club that was called Count Basie's, around 125th Street, thereabouts, 130th Street. But never had a lot of conversations until when? I'd say, so that's 68, 69, 70, or 60, late 69. I met John at the home of a recording engineer whose name I can't remember now either, but also where I ended up recording with Miroslav Vitos, an album called Purple.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there. We had sort of like a loose group of artists, musicians who just would tap each other on the shoulder if they needed. I had nothing to record then myself. It was just nice to record and get a handle on. The engineer's name is David Baker, and he's now no longer with us. But his father had just bought him a multi-track recorder, a 12-track Scully that was brand new on the market, and he was learning how to use it in his. He was living in Washington Square Park, right off the Square Park in the brownstone.
Yeah.
And on the and he had a kind of a shotgun of everything. Just was like go from the front to the back, straight through, and all the rooms are on the left or on the right.
I just watched an Architecture Digest about the history of those buildings. I can't think of Railroad.
Yeah. It's like you just blow right through everything on the inside, and so every room in his bedroom, I think, was where the recording board was and his little thing, and then I was recording in the kitchen. Wayne Shorter was in the bathtub, in the bathroom. Chick Corea was playing piano in the kitchen with me. And then outside in the hallway, I think it was McGonagall. Larry Coryell was playing guitar.
Oh my God.
And so that's what we made Spaces. The first Spaces album, I think, was made there.
You recorded it all in that apartment?
I think so.
Wow.
It
That's
was for
crazy.
Vanguard. Yeah, yeah, and all it was just something that happened. And it was not just only me. On some days, it was Alphonse Mouzon was there. Um, and I forget the other. There was a drummer out of Minnesota, out of Minneapolis. He was a really fine player. He played with McCoy Tyner for a long time, and I can't remember his name now. But that's how those things developed. It was almost like being after having gone to France and experiencing the social environment, just a little bit of these painters, the painters, what Picasso. Um, there was like a bunch of painters that came together. They had no money, and the only way that they could get something to eat was to draw something on sometimes in this one particular restaurant. It still exists to this day. Uh, an example of what they were thinking about. These guys would cut them out and all of this. They would just write on the tablecloth and a promissory note and a beautiful image or something that they it was amazing and mobiles are there from these artists now. The drawings and drafts of these artists, a lot of them are up on the wall. They're worth these are the originals, unbelievable amounts of money, and so it was kind of the same way we would just get paid with a recording tape, a copy of what we did that day, and it was a 2-track, not even a 2-track, it was a 1/4-inch tape. And after a while, those things just, of course, fell apart. No good after 25 years.
You know what? You had a place to eat, you had a place to sleep, and you were making music doing it. That's the greatest thing ever.
Yeah, sure.
Well, Billy, I hate to say it, we're out of time. I have so much more I want to talk to you about. Maybe in the future, if you're willing, we could do another one of these. But either way, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me. I know it's late where you are, and I really, really appreciate it.
No problem.
Awesome.
Glad to be helped.
Would you mind sticking around for
take care, man.
Would you mind sticking around for 1 second, but real quick once I log off? Just literally 2 minutes. Thank you. Okay. I appreciate it. Okay, y'all. I'm not sure when we're live yet next, but you'll see it on Instagram and all that. I'll talk to you guys later.